I was in Israel a few months ago over the winter working on a publication project, and I was asked to give a lecture in the West Bank town of Ofra. And so we had a packed house that night. The whole community came out. They were thrilled. We formed a very close relationship with them over the years. In fact, they have a monument there at the community that is erected, and it's very humbling for me to even say this, but on the monument there in the community, it says that I am the hero of their community. And the story behind that is that we excavated a mass murder from 2,000 years ago, 8 murder victims from the Great Revolt 2,000 years ago that had lain there after being butchered by the Romans, and we were the ones who uncovered their skeletal remains and then gave them proper burial in the West Bank and then published the story and made it known. The story is called A Mass Murder Mystery at Makadar. And I had a gag order on me for 4 years from the Antiquity Authority and couldn't talk about that, but now it's all said and done. But it's humbling to see something like that. We're just doing archaeology. We're doing good work, but the Lord blesses us. He's formed close relationships like that, and it gives us the opportunity to then speak into these people's lives. And so that evening, they asked me to come in and speak. And half of the group spoke English and half spoke Hebrew. Now, the ones that spoke Hebrew, they understand some English, but they're more comfortable in Hebrew. And so there was an interpreter with me. And I began by asking the question, how do you say fake news in Hebrew? And they all, even the ones who did not speak English, understood that. And we kind of broke the ice. And I said, the reason I'm bringing this up is because in the last year, there have been almost 1,000 news stories that have been done on the Associates for Biblical Research and our dig at Shiloh and Kirbet El Makadar. I'm not sure what constitutes viral, but anyway, we had a lot of news stories in languages that I never even knew existed. And once the Fox News story went out, and then it was just picked up from so many other folks. But of those 1,000 stories in all these different languages, guess how many reporters ever called me to verify the facts? 4. And it's not like I'm hard to find. The ones who found me, I'm sure, just did a web search and found me very easily. And my point is this: we live in an information age, which is a blessing on one hand. On the other hand, we have to be careful how we consume information, because most of those news stories had inaccuracies in them. They didn't even bother to send an email or to make a phone call to verify. So they're misquoting me or quoting me out of context, or the pictures are with the wrong captions and things like this. And so it's just an instant age that we live in. So keep that in mind as you're consuming news, and in particular, archaeological news, because boy, you'll see all kinds of claims out there about things that are archaeological. How many have heard this one? The temple wasn't really on the Temple Mount. Heard that one recently? Yeah. How about skeletons of giants have been found in Israel? Yeah. So I get contacted with these questions all the time, and I'm glad when people do, because we want to always set the record straight. Well, one of the things that we have to do when we begin to dig is to understand stratification. And this is our layering system. So in an archaeological dig, the deeper you go, the older the material is. Does that make sense? So you have more modern material, and as you're going through levels of occupation, and you might be thinking, what's up with this? Why do we have all these different levels? Well, the reason people chose that site in the first place was probably because it had water, had a good water source. Number 2, it was probably defensible. Number 3, it probably had access to trade routes. And these are the things that you would want in a site. So even if it's deserted or destroyed, people tend to come back, and all this building material is lying around, and they build on top. And over time, you get a profile that we call a tell. But you can see one of the things that we have to do is to determine what material is from which time period and what properly fits the biblical account. This gentleman's name is Charles Wilson. He worked in the land of Israel in the 1860s and 1870s on behalf of the Palestine Exploration Fund. And back in those days, much of the land was still accessible. You could see the ancient sites that now with modernity, you have sprawl that has destroyed and covered much of the ancient evidence. So Wilson was able to document many of those things in his diary. So we often go back to Wilson and Schick and some of these early explorers to get clues for the things that we are then looking for in our particular research. And here's what Wilson wrote in 1873 in the Palestine Exploration Quarterly. I just published an article in this same peer-reviewed journal, PEQ. He writes, near the site of the new Protestant church, and he's referring to Christ Church just inside Jaffa Gate. This is the oldest Protestant church in Jerusalem. How many of you saw me on the Travel Channel a few months ago? 3 of you. God bless you. Oh, that's wonderful. All right. Well, if you missed this, you can still go out there and watch it. It's season 3, episode 12 of Expedition Unknown. It was all about the Ark of the Covenant. They just sent me the Nielsen ratings for 2017. It was the highest rated program in 2017. And so I'm sure that means I'm an excellent actor. It's the subject matter that drew the attention, which is the Ark of the Covenant, because the Ark of the Covenant is big, and the Ark of the Covenant is inside the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, and that reflects the presence of God. And this is why this is such a huge and important topic. I bring that up because the episode is filmed right behind Christ Church, where I take them into underground Jerusalem and explore some caves, which we'll get to in a second, and passageways. So near the new Protestant church, he writes, without the city, 4 laculi have been discovered, sunk deep into the rock and covered with flat stone slabs. A steep flight of steps led down to them, and they are covered by a vaulted chamber of masonry. Mr. Schick, this is Conrad Schick, the great German explorer and architect, forwards a sketch of the ruins of Siloon, which is Shiloh, the interest attaching to Shiloh as the place in which the ark rested from the latter days of Joshua to the time of Samuel is so great that a short description of the existing ruins may be acceptable. Notice that in 1873, he just can't help himself from talking about Shiloh. The ruins there have such excitement, such promise. There's so many things that they could tell us, but it would be many years before we would get the opportunity. A few years later, McGowan writes the same thing. He says, look at all the questions that remain unanswered. If we could excavate Shiloh, McGowan says, think about the clarity that we could get in the biblical text. Praise God that we now have the opportunity to finally answer some of these critical questions. As I told you, I led the team from the Discovery Channel down into this cavern. We descended 40 feet through a narrow passageway. If you were claustrophobic, it would not have blessed you at all. And we descended down into underground Jerusalem. And as we're going through this passageway toward the Temple Mount, you know, all my life I've been told there are these tunnels underneath the Temple Mount, and maybe the Ark of the Covenant is there. I really didn't buy into that, but it's actually true. There is a network of tunnels, and I personally discovered one of these. And here's what I saw: the signature up on my left, the signature of Conrad Schick, the gentleman that we just talked about. Schick had been in this very tunnel in 1873. He dated it here, and his companion also signed it in the 1873 is even clearer next to that. So we knew we were on the right track because Schick had documented this tunnel system. He actually built a model of it and took it to the World's Fair in Chicago. I said 1873, I meant 1863. So the next year in 1864, he actually took his model to the World's Fair. So very famous, and he ties in with Wilson, and it ties in with Shiloh. Now, the first question I want to deal with tonight is, who built the Mishkan? Who built the tabernacle, and why is it important? Well, first of all, the tabernacle is important because it deals with what I believe is the most basic of all human questions. How do I connect with God? God is holy, God is righteous, God is perfect. I am not. I fail God, I sin against other people and against God. How do I have fellowship with a perfect God? And sacrifice provides the answer. Leviticus is very clear. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. It's through the sacrificial system that I can restore fellowship with fellow man, and I can restore fellowship with God. But who built this? Does the Bible actually tell us? Now, had I quizzed you before you came in tonight and given you a pretest, It would have been a pretty hard question, wouldn't it? Who built the tabernacle? Well, it tells us in Exodus 31 and in Exodus 38. This is Yahweh speaking in first person. I have called by name Bezalel of the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God in all wisdom and understanding, in knowledge, and in all kinds of craftsmanship, to make artistic designs for work in gold, in silver, and in bronze, and in the cutting of stones for settings. This guy is talented. I mean, he can make all kinds of things. He works with metals and precious stones. He's a very skilled craftsman. And God says, I'm the one who's put my Spirit in him. I'm the one who's called him. I'm the one who has enabled Bezalel. It's almost like God has been watching this man at work while he's supervising, while he's doing his job, and God says, I like that. I see a spirit of excellence in him, and now I've got a special task for this guy. You see, we're really all in training for reigning. God's looking at where we are in life right now, and he's seeing what we're doing, and he's preparing us so that he can use us in a greater way. Reminds me of Daniel 6:3. The Bible says that Daniel excelled far above his peers, for there was found in him an excellent spirit. And when we demonstrate an excellent spirit, not only do we catch the attention of others, but we catch the attention of Almighty God. He's watching. Well, he doesn't do it alone. Verse 6 says, I have appointed with him Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach. So here we go. We've got Bezalel and Aholiab, and we know that Aholiab's father is Ahisamach. Now, I want to ask this. Why are we told the father of Aholiab, but not the father of Bezalel? That seems a little unfair to Bezalel, doesn't it? It's because in inscriptions, it's always the case. The ancestor is not mentioned unless he's someone of prominence that everyone would know. So the father of Bezalel is probably a regular guy, and the father of Aholiab is someone that the whole community knows. So his name is mentioned, the name Ahisamach. Now, how many of you have friends named Ahisamach? I think if I were to have another child, I'd name him Ahisamach, just to make him tough. Well, he's from the tribe of Dan. So Bezalel is from Judah, and Aholiab and Ahisamach are from the tribe of Dan. Now, God continues. He says, in the hearts of all who are skillful, I have put skill. Musicians, artists, I'm the one who has given you the skill, that they may make all that I have commanded you, the tent of meeting, the ark of testimony and the mercy seat upon it, and all the furniture in the tent. I want you to remember that name, Ahisamach, because we have a stone here that we call Sinai 375A. Well, if there's 375 of them, there's quite a bit. There's actually a lot more than that. Down in the Sinai region where the Israelites worked in the mines before they exited from Egypt, we have a number of inscriptions. This comes from a site called Serabet El Khadim in the southeastern Sinai, and it's, as I said, called Sinai 375. Now, when you look at this, you may just see scratching on a rock. Well, the untrained eye can miss this very easily, but if you've been around someone who has expertise in a field, say my father-in-law who was an entomologist, he could look at a bug and tell you everything about that bug. Is it a good bug or is it a bad bug? Is it good for your crops or bad for your crops? I know nothing about bugs. The only thing I know about bugs are the scarabs, okay, an archaeological use of it. Outside of that, I don't know anything about bugs. But he could tell you the phylum, the genus, the species, and everything you'd ever want to know about bugs. An epigrapher can do the same thing with an ancient inscription because of that level of expertise. So when we work with this, this is what we have. On Sinai 375A, we have a series of symbols vertically and horizontally. These are actually Middle Egyptian images and dating to the 18th Egyptian dynasty. And they are morphing into early Hebrew alphabetic letters. So while they were a hieroglyphic symbol, now they're beginning to take on a phonetic representation. For example, some of you are students of Hebrew. Does anyone see an ox head up there? Okay, do you see another one? Okay. For our students of Hebrew, what Hebrew letter do you think that ox head is morphing into there? Right, the Aleph, exactly. And we believe this is the earliest example of what we would call Proto-Sinaitic script or Proto-Hebraic script. And we're seeing now an alphabetic representation that will enable someone named Moses to be able to write the books of the law. If you didn't have an alphabetic phonetic script and you were trying to write this in hieroglyphic form, do you know how the books it would take you to do that? You would fill this sanctuary with the books. But when you've got 22 letters and each represents a sound, now you can do it in a fraction of the space. Isn't that amazing that even in the writing of the Bible that God is preparing an alphabet for just the perfect time? Now, as you begin to work with this, and by the way, this is Dr. Petrovich, one of our professors at the Bible Seminary. These are his work on this epigraphy here. You read first the vertical and secondly the horizontal. And since the Hebrew fonts are not installed on this computer, you're not seeing it in Hebrew, you're seeing it in English, but I'll just tell you what it says. So first of all, we read this, and it is the overseer, and then horizontally, it spells out his name letter by letter, Ahisamak. Now, wait a minute. That's the name we just read in the Bible in Exodus 31 and in Exodus 38. There is no other place on planet Earth where you have the name Ahisamak except in Exodus and except on Sinai 375a, which just happens to be the exact place where the Israelites were immediately prior to the Exodus. So before we even get to Shiloh, we actually already know, I believe, some things about the Mishkan and the Israelite people as they are coming out. Now, the whole inscription says, the overseer of minerals. That's what we just read in Exodus 38. These guys are skilled at working with minerals, and it's very logical that if the father was in this field, that the son would be in the same field. Exactly what the Bible says. And then ultimately, the one having been elevated is weary to forget. In other words, I used to be down at the bottom, and now I've been elevated, but I'm not going to forget where I came from. Okay? And so this inscription then, Sinai 375a, begins to shed some light on the tabernacle itself. Now, you know that when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they wandered for 40 years, actually 39 years, and then they camped the 40th year in the plains of Moab, Joshua 2:1, at a place called Shittim. And from Shittim then, they cross over at a place that's really today the baptismal site. So where John the Baptist chooses the headquarters for his public ministry is the exact same spot that the Israelites have crossed over 1,400 years earlier into the Promised Land, where the Jordan is miraculously parted. This is why we read in the Bible that John was baptizing at Bethabara, the house of the crossing, the place where the Israelites have crossed. Chris, you know about that spot. You were baptized there. And it's at this spot that the heavens open. It's at the same spot that God sends a fiery chariot down to get Elijah. Yes, Elijah's hill is right next to the baptismal spot. No wonder they were conflating John the Baptist and Elijah. It's at that very, very spot. They cross over and they camp at Gilgal. From Gilgal, they have victory at Jericho, which we talked about this morning, Joshua 6. From there, they go to Ai, and they are defeated in chapter 7, and then they have victory in chapter 8. They go north and renew covenant at Shechem with Mount Gerizim on one side, Mount Ebal on the other side, and ultimately they wind their way down to Shiloh. When they come to Shiloh, Joshua 18:1 says, the whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, and the country was brought under their control. It was also at Shiloh that the remaining tribal allotments were given out, because 7 of the tribes still didn't have their allotment, their inheritance. And so Joshua gives these final tribal allotments. Now, why did they choose Shiloh? We don't know for sure, but we do know that Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim, and Shiloh is in the tribal territory of Ephraim. We also know that it's centrally located in the Israelite inheritance, and so maybe there were multiple reasons, but whatever they were, God has designated this, and Joshua leads them to Shiloh, and the tabernacle is then set up there in about the year 1399. Now, I want you to look at the numbers here, And the only one for now to remember is right here, 52 by 26, because we'll come back to that in a few minutes, the dimensions of the Mishkan. When you visit Shiloh, you'll see a sign there that tells you that the tabernacle was at Shiloh for 369 years. They're quoting the Seder Olam, it was a 2nd century Talmudic piece of literature. The only problem, my friends, is that the Bible doesn't agree. The Bible says that the tabernacle was at Shiloh for about 305 years, not 369 years. Now you might say, why does it matter? Well, it does when we're matching those strata with these events in the Bible. We want to be as precise as we can. So we are in an opportunity, though, where we're able to dialogue now with our Israeli friends, and actually they might not even be aware that there's a conflict between the Talmudic literature and the Bible, and we can get them back to the Bible. Would that be okay with you guys if we got everybody back to the Bible? All right. Now here's where we're digging at Shiloh. The blue X's mark the spot. This is the northern perimeter wall. It's about 5.5 meters wide. That's a good 19 feet wide. That's a pretty wide wall. And what we want to do is to see the outside of the wall, the top of the wall, and the inside of the wall, because in these areas is where I believe we will find storage rooms from the period of the tabernacle that are going to reveal a lot to us. And in fact, that's exactly what we are finding. You can see a shot here from our drone. I remember 5 years ago, the first time that we flew a drone, everybody stopped working and they stared up into the sky. Now it's no big deal. Everybody just keeps on working. Oh, it's just another drone flying around. The technology that we bring to bear is fascinating. We fly a drone every day. We do 3D imaging of all of our squares. So we recreate them digitally, and then we file those away so that we have them whenever we need them. Each one of my supervisors at Shiloh has an iPad that he or she works from, where they're entering data in the field paperlessly, entering in the data, and then all that data is feeding into my iPad, which is like the big one, the 12.9-inch one. So I'm seeing all the squares simultaneously, and I'm making data-driven decisions about what we're doing in the field. I'm not just getting a feeling like I think we should do this or that, but based on my experience and the data in front of me, I can then make intelligent decisions about what we're actually doing. Now, what are we looking at here? We're looking at storerooms. And in fact, from the probes that we have done, the entire perimeter of Shiloh, which is about 6 acres, has storage rooms on the inside and the outside. What in the world do they need all these? I mean, every city needs some storage rooms, but there's nothing in Israel like this. Why do these people need all of these storage rooms? Well, it begs the question. So let me ask you this. If you wanted to pay your tithe in Old Testament times, you were going to go to Shiloh, how would you do that? I mean, God has commanded you to pay your tithe. How are you going to do it? Go to tabernacle.org and make a secure donation through the Tabernacle app? It's like the Grace app? I don't think so. How about write a check? Yeah, just go to Eli and just give him a check. Here, we had a big harvest this year. Brother Eli, here's the check. I don't think that will work either, would it? How about we pay in cash? Let's just give cash. Oh, that's not going to be invented for a couple of thousand years. There's no cash at the time. Well, how about coins? We've got coins. No, that's not until 600 BC. We're 800 years before that. We've got no coins. We've got no cash. We've got no checks. We've got no Wi-Fi. And we've got no apps. How do we obey God and pay our tithes? Well, when you go to Shiloh, what do you bring with you? You bring that tenth of the harvest. You've got bushels of grain and barley and wheat and figs. You're bringing all your produce, a tenth of it, to Shiloh. And all these Israelites are coming at the same time for the great feast. Where are you going to put all this stuff? No wonder the first thing that we uncover are these great storerooms. Now, some of them go back to the Amorite time period. Remember that the Israelites didn't build this city. The Israelites didn't build hardly any of the cities. They took over an entire country. God told them, you're going to occupy cities that you did not build. You're going to live in houses that you did not construct. Do you know how expensive it is to build a city? Infrastructure? Now you're going to inherit generational wealth. This is why they only burned 3 cities in the entire conquest. Anyone know what those 3 cities were? Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor. That's it. They don't burn any of the others. Why would they? This is their inheritance. They're going to then live in these Canaanite houses for generations until they begin to build their own. So the Canaanites have already built the infrastructure of the country, but their civilization is about to collapse under the weight of its own corruption, and the Israelites are coming in at just the right time. The Bible specifically says that the people living in the central hill country are Amorites, not Canaanites. So sometimes we say Canaanite to mean in a general sense, but if you want to be more specific, more biblical, then you can refer to the people in the highlands as Amorites. So the Amorites built this fortification wall, and the Israelites took it over and used it from there. We have to determine the time period of all these walls. So as we uncover a wall, how do we know if it's from the Bronze Age? How do we know if it's from the Iron Age or the early Roman period, which would be the New Testament times, and so forth? And so to me, this is the world's greatest jigsaw puzzle. It's to excavate it and then give context to everything. And this is what the different colors here reflect. Now, there's a famous map in Jordan in the city of Madaba, which is a biblical city also mentioned in Joshua. And the people in Madaba, the Christians in the 5th century, decided they were going to build a new church. And in their church, they wanted to do it differently. Someone was thinking outside the box. They said, let's build the floor of our church into a map of the Holy Land. So we'll put Jerusalem over here and the Sea of Galilee up here, and we'll show the Jordan River and all the cities. Just imagine right now if the floor of your sanctuary was a big map of the land of the Bible. And let's think also that maybe all of you were not literate, you were not all able to read, how valuable those pictures would be. So when your pastor is preaching, he'd say, so the Israelites moved from over here to over here. I'm seriously, a picture's worth. Yeah, I mean, it would create an image. Just like if we were in the Sistine Chapel and I were preaching, I would be pointing up and I would say, so Abraham did this, and then he moved from here to there, because I would have all of these images to draw from. But in this case, it's the floor. It's the only church that's ever been found that's like this, and it dates to the 5th century. Half of the map has survived, and so we often go back to the Madaba map to give us clues when we're doing our research. And on the Madaba map, Shiloh barely does survive. It's over here on the edge. But what it says, and this is, of course, in Greek, Shiloh or Shiloh, where the ark stayed. So let's make no mistake about it. Shiloh is important because it's the presence of God. It's the Ark of the Covenant, and it is the center of Israelite worship for over 3 centuries. Jerusalem is still a pagan city for hundreds of years. It's at Shiloh that you go to connect with God. Now at Khirbet el-Maqader, at Biblical Ai, these are some of the houses, very primitive Israelite houses, that we excavated in the wall. So they literally dug into those Amorite walls and used that material to build their houses. These are very primitive, what I would call phase 1 of the Israelite house. Probably they've got tents pitched out here too. So they've built some structures, but they're also partially living in tents. It's what we would call semi-nomadic. So they're partially in tents and partially in dwellings. This is when they begin to move out of those old Canaanite and Amorite houses. And this is exactly the way that we excavated it at our site. So I believe we could call this phase 1 of the Israelite house. At Shiloh, we have what I would call phase 2 of the development of the Israelite house. And you can see now it's very different. You've got pillared courtyards. You've got storage jars in here. The Finkelstein, who's a minimalist, said that he believed this was a storeroom from the period of the sacrificial system. He wasn't sure that they were Israelites there, but there was a sacrificial system, and this was probably a storeroom. I disagree. Just because there are storage jars doesn't mean anything. Every house would have had storage jars within it. I think this is a typical Israelite house from the period of the Judges. Who knows, maybe it's even Eli's house. Phase 3 of the Israelite house is what we call the 4-room house, because it has 4 rooms on the first floor. On the second floor is the domestic area where the family lives, and then on the roof as well. And this is what it looks like. This is inside the Harvard Semitic Museum. They have recreated a 4-room house, and you can get the idea that it's really like a barn on the first floor, animals and storage and utilitarian space, the family living then on the second floor and on the roof. Now remember that in the law of Moses, you are commanded to build a fence around your roof. Now, how many of you have done that? Not taking that seriously, huh? Well, why would you need to have a fence around your roof? Well, if you're using it as a living space, you certainly would want to, because you've got little toddlers running around up there. You don't want some toddler falling off the roof, or you don't want your dog, when the mailman comes by, you don't want your dog flying off the roof either. I actually saw that in Latin America once. I saw a dog fly off the roof. It was not nice. It was an example of the Canaanites. Not to be confused with the Feleinsteins, okay? I know, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, you do need a fence around the roof, because people could fall off. And there's that storage area at Shiloh that I believe is actually a house. And here's one of our storage jars that we excavated. It's a pithos about, maybe 5 feet, 4.5, 5 feet tall. We've done a complete restoration on it. We call this a collared rim jar. So see the diagnostic ridge there and the collar on the top. Now, once you learn the pottery, and in archaeology it's very important, once you learn the pottery, then you can begin to date all the other structures using the pottery. Hopefully we've got other means that we can triangulate on a date, but the pottery is very important in the overall argument. Now, this one comes from the tribal territory of Benjamin, where we were working at Biblical Eye, and so we named him Benjamin, all right, or Ben for short. And he is on display right now at the University of Northwestern at St. Paul. Would have been filled with grain or filled with water. The spring is about a kilometer away, and so they're constantly making trips to the spring and refilling their big storage jars. But this is called a pithos. When a different group moves in, can we tell that in the archaeological record? Like, are there ethnic indicators? Do you see a change in the material culture? The answer is yes. Different pottery, different burial styles, different food consumption habits. Can you think of one example of that? How about a prohibition in Leviticus against pork? Yeah. So we test all of our bones. We have thousands of bones every season. We have them all tested. I have a zoo archaeologist on my staff. The zoo archaeologist then will give me a report and tell me, okay, you've got X percentage of sheep and goat and X percentage of cattle, and I'll get a total breakdown on the bones. Well, it's very interesting, because in the pre-Israelite period, we've got 4% pig bone. In the Israelite period, we've got 1% pig bone. Now, that's a very significant shift in the material culture. There's a change of diet, change of pottery, change of diet, change of burial types. Different people are living there. When we take all that and we put it together, it becomes an inductive argument that gives us verisimilitude. The Bible says it, and the material culture matches it. Now, maybe you're out there thinking, 1%, what are those Israelites doing eating any pork? You know, what's up with that 1%? To which I respond, have you ever smelled bacon frying? I mean, give these guys a break. Here are some of the collared rim pithoi that we excavated this last season. This one in particular, we're doing a reconstruction on. We have the entire rim and part of the neck, and then we've got most of the body, but we're missing the connection. No, we're just a little bit that's missing so that we can finish the restoration. So in that particular square where this came from, they're going to be very careful their first few days back in the field this summer to try to collect the rest of the missing pieces so that we can finish this restoration. And this gentleman is going to also be on display, and he will get a name too once he's finished. One of the other evidences of cultic activity at Shiloh, religious activity, are four-horned altars. In the entire land of Israel, there are only 7 four-horned altars that have ever been found, 2 of them at Shiloh. Clear evidence, I believe, of a sacrificial system there. Jerome, who's a very famous person in church history, he's the one who wrote the Vulgate. So, I mean, the brother lived in a cave in Bethlehem and translated the Vulgate. And so you got to admire this. He went to Shiloh, and he said that he could still see the altar was there in the 5th century when he went. So what do? We move from the known to the unknown. And what we found in secondary usage here is indeed a 4-horned altar, but outside the city is a second 4-horned altar, and it's massive. This one is big enough that an entire bull would be bound on top of it. Now, maybe you're thinking, what's up with the horns? Why do we need horns? Well, the sacrifice was bound using those horns on the altar. Also, remember that in the cities of refuge, that a person could seek refuge and grab a hold of the horns of the altar for mercy as well. Now, I find this one very interesting because it's outside the city of Shiloh, about a half a mile. Is this an indication of what the Bible tells us about the paganism of the Israelites? As they begin to turn their hearts away from God, they begin to build altars on every high hill and under every green tree. And so, do we have a sacrificial system going on in the tabernacle in Shiloh, and a half a mile away, pagan sacrifices going on? Gosh, my instincts tell me that that's probably what was going on. And this did not bless the Lord. And ultimately, they paid a price for this. Where was the tabernacle at Shiloh? I think there are 4 possibilities. Number 1, we could say that it was in the north. There's a northern platform there that more or less fits the dimensions of the tabernacle, and that's your option 1. If you visit Shiloh today, you'll see some signs that point there and tell you that's the area of the tabernacle. Oh, we don't have any proof of that. That's just good for tourism. But it does more or less fit the dimensions of the tabernacle. So there is some folks who like that as an option. Then we have the summit itself. And on the summit, there's a large Byzantine-era building that's there now that I think is protecting the earlier material that is underneath it. I was always told that it could not have been on the summit. I read this in numerous articles because there wasn't room on the summit. So I decided to measure it for myself this last year. I went out with our architect, Lane Rittmeyer, and we measured it. And remember those numbers I asked you to make a mental note of? 52 by 26. Good. So we measured it, and we measured it out to be 54 by 27, a perfect fit. Fits like a glove. So you got to be careful with information. Just because someone says it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true until it's verified. If you've got a hypothesis, you have to test it. So I think the summit is a good possibility because we have a bone deposit at Shiloh. This bone deposit is about 2 meters deep, and it's about half the size of this sanctuary. It is massive. It's full of animal bones and late Bronze Age pottery from the early period of the Israelites there. The only bones in this bone deposit, what we would call a favisa, are from the biblical sacrificial system. Are you getting excited yet? So what are you going to do with all these animal remains? We've got a massive bone deposit there where they're being dumped. And the vessels that are in there are whole vessels or restorable vessels, as if they're giving a drink offering, a libation. So they've made their sacrifice, and now they're breaking the vessel as part of this ritual of giving a libation, a drink offering, to the Lord. So Finkelstein, who is the leader of the minimalist school of thought, now the minimalists are the ones who want to tell you that you can't trust the Bible. In fact, Finkelstein wrote a book, and he called it The Bible Unearthed. I told him you should have called it The Bible Covered Up because everything you did was to tell people why they can't trust the Bible. He's the dean of the School of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. and extremely well-known archaeologist. He dug at Shiloh back in the 1980s. And the way he told the story, there's not really any evidence there that matches the biblical text. Well, Proverbs 21 says the first one to present his case sounds right until another comes along. And folks, another has come along. And we are re-examining the evidence, and we're presenting it in a proper context. Finkelstein took that bone deposit, and he said it's clear evidence of a Canaanite sacrificial system at Shiloh. The Canaanites were sacrificing there, which was not even correct there. They were Amorites. Can you believe that? Only bones from the biblical sacrificial system. So it's clear evidence of Canaanite sacrifice there. Welcome to my world. Option 3 is the southern approach. The Christians really liked this one. The Christians built 4 churches down on that southern approach. One of those churches had an inscription in it. And that inscription says, are you sitting down? An archaeologist's dream is to have an inscription that has the name of your site, so you don't have to fight over whether you have the right site. The inscription in the church says, Lord, bless the people of Shiloh. Wow. End of discussion. So we know that Shiloh is Shiloh, and the Christians kind of like this southern area. I've introduced a 4th possibility, and that is that the tabernacle was actually mobile at Shiloh. It didn't have to stay in one location. By its very nature, it is mobile. Now, I want you to think about this. I have a friend in the slaughter business in Central Texas, and they slaughter about 100 cattle a day. When they do, they take an 18-wheeler, a semi, all the refuse, the skin, the bone, the guts, everything that's not going to market, it fills up an 18-wheeler every single day. That's what's going on at Shiloh. What are you going to do with all of that? And when the wind changes direction and is blowing at you, this is just overwhelming, not to mention non-hygienic. And so I believe that they very well have moved seasonally around the site, depending on how the wind was blowing. By its very nature, the tabernacle was mobile. So suffice it to say, we've only begun. We have one season in excavation, but these are the theories that we are exploring. This gives you a close-up of option 1, of option 2, which I sort of lean toward. And you can see me standing inside that Byzantine building there, kind of marking the spot where we intend to excavate. Option 3, down on the south where the churches are. This is a church that I excavated several years ago at another site. And what I've done here with this red line, I have superimposed that 52 by 26, the dimensions of the tabernacle. I superimposed them on this church that I excavated, and look at what you get. A perfect spot-on match. A ratio of 2 to 1, which is what you've got in the Bible, from holy to most holy, a ratio of 2 to 1. I didn't know that. I didn't know that the early Christians were seeing themselves in terms of the tabernacle of God. And I suppose I should have, because both Paul and Peter use this terminology, we are the temple of God and so forth, but that they were architecturally building with that in mind, we simply had no idea. Now, here are a few of the objects that we found at Shiloh. This is a seal from the Middle Bronze Age. It's about 3,700 years old. So if you're buying a jar of perfume, you want to make sure it's sealed. So you put a string across the top and a clay seal on both sides of that string to hold the top down. And then you seal it with your signet ring so you know that it's not been tampered with when you open it. And on the back of it, you can even see where the string ran through it. This is our first scarab that we found. I talked about scarabs this morning, so once we got into the Bronze Age context, we began to find them again. Do you see the smiley face? Look at there. 3,700-year-old. That smiley face. This is going to be on our T-shirts this coming year for our Dig T-shirts. So I'm going to teach you a Hebrew word now. All right, if you were here this morning, what word did you learn? Starts with an A. I should have asked you if you want to buy a vowel. Arara, good. And if you say it backwards, Arara, good. All right. The word for tonight is sababa. Sababa. Turn to someone and say sababa. All right. Sababa means, it's an Arabic word, but it's been adopted into Hebrew. And it means hakuna matata. It means like, no worries, life is good, kind of is the meaning of it. Sababa. So when I see this scarab, that's what I think of. Sababa, everything is good. So this was our first scarab. This was the very next day, another Hyksos period scarab. So we're clearly into a Bronze Age context at this point. And this one was recovered through wet sifting. Here's a bead from the period of the tabernacle. So don't think that these people had Spartan lives. They dressed in black and white. They were like, pilgrims or something like that, which is not even, the pilgrims didn't even dress like that, by the way. The pilgrims actually dressed very brightly and so forth. But, don't think that these people were Spartan and, rigid and all this. No, they had very rich lives and rich colors and jewelry. We find all kinds of cosmetic equipment and jewelries and accoutrements. And this bead is just one example of that we've recovered from our wet sifting project. Speaking of wet sifting, I told you about this lady this morning, the granddaughter of Ance Hatfield from the Hatfield-McCoy feud. Now, this is 85 years old, volunteering at the archaeological dig, so you have no excuses other than come join me and Pastor Jerry. We'll have a great time. This is our primitive wet sifting from season 1, but we're building a massive state-of-the-art system for this coming season. And we actually have a guy going over 3 weeks early to supervise the construction of it so that we can really increase our productivity. What is wet sifting? So you're working in an archaeological square, and the volunteers are trying to be careful. And as they're finding pottery, they're putting it in a pottery pail that has a tag on it. If it's an object, they're telling their supervisor who can tag it. A photographer is taking pictures in situ. So everything's copacetic as it should be. They're working carefully. But they're not going to see everything. So then the dirt, before we dump it, we take it and in a sieve, we dry sift it. And so there's somebody there to supervise that. And then we're finding things that we had missed in the square. Now we've added a third protocol to that. We take all that material before we toss it, and we take it over to our wet sifters, and we wash it. Wow. You wouldn't believe what we've been missing all these years. Because when you wash it, what looked like a clump of dirt is actually a coin or a scarab. We've been missing a lot. I mean, not just my dig, everybody. At least we've learned, and we're doing better now through the wet sifting. So we're the first ones outside Jerusalem to ever employ this. And I worked for 2 years in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount sifting project, and this is where I became a believer in this. So we are wholesale into wet sifting, and we are finding things you wouldn't believe. I mean, in Finkelstein's dig, they found a few dozen coins. I mean, we found almost 300 coins just in season 1 alone. So you can see what has been missed in previous times. Well, we have numerous amounts of evidence. A lot of the bone gets reused. Here's some of our pottery from Shiloh from the period of the tabernacle. Here are some of those storage jars I was telling you about as we excavate them. And most of these we'll be able to do a complete restoration on. Isn't that neat? There's some of that collared rim pottery. Here's one of our volunteers excavating a mud brick that would have been up on top of that perimeter wall, and we're documenting this as we go. And here's our team working at Shiloh and your invitation to come join us there. So let me see if I can bring this to a close. And what is the faith lesson? Leviticus 17, repeated by the writer of the Hebrews. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. As we understand the biblical sacrificial system and how the tabernacle functioned at Shiloh, we understand the ways of God better, we understand the material culture of the biblical times better, and we have a perfect laboratory to then be able to say, the Bible says it, and we find the same thing over here. It synchronizes, it matches. Now, what if I could give you hundreds of examples like that? The Bible said it, and we have proof of it in the archaeological record. A fair-minded person would eventually say, you know what? I think that's a trustworthy document, isn't it? And that's what we are in the arena for. Now, will this make someone be a believer? No. Jesus said even if someone rises from the dead, some people wouldn't believe. If someone is predisposed to unbelief, they will not. But there are some people who are fair-minded. They've just been given bad information, and we want to make sure that they have good information, and then we're going to ask the Holy Spirit to work in their lives and to bring them to faith and to bring them to repentance. I so appreciate your interest in what we've shared the last couple of days, and I look forward to visiting with you after the service this evening and continuing to remain in contact in the days ahead. So, shalom, and God bless you.